right, so we're going to start here in chapter 49. So we're in Genesis chapter 49. We're going to look at the last couple verses. We are not going to spend much time. I'm pretty sure we're going to be pretty quick through this tonight. Tonight should be our last night. But we can see the beginning of the end, we could say. So let's take a look. Let's read verses 28 through 33. So chapter 49, 28 to 33. Somebody want to read those verses for us?
Sure, I'll read them.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess at the burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people.
All right, very good. So what's going on in this section here? What are the big ideas? What's going on?
Well, basically, I'm dying. I'm about to go.
Right. Absolutely. That's, he's getting ready for his death. He has a specific place that he wants to be buried. Now, where is Jacob living?
In Goshen still, isn't
Okay.
he?
Well, yeah, which is where? It's Goshen.
Egypt.
Yeah, that's right. Goshen. He's in Egypt. Absolutely. And where does he want to be buried?
Back in Canaan.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the reasoning he gives? Why? What's the rationale?
Well, that's where his family was buried.
Yeah.
The ones he took care of, his wives and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. He wants to go home. Egypt is not his home, right? We've kind of labored this point a number of times in this study, especially towards the end here, because there's this big emphasis, especially in Jacob's life, as well as others, but there's this big emphasis of going home. And home is not in Egypt. It's not somewhere, it's in Canaan. And the reason that's home is for a number of reasons. Jacob, obviously, he mentions his family, right? Abraham, Isaac. This is the place of home. This is where my relatives are. This is where family is. But it's also because this is the place of the promised land. This is the land that God had promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Now, they didn't possess the land, at least in full. Abraham bought, a piece of land in the field of Machpelah, but they didn't own the land outright yet, but they had it in promise, right? There was a promise there that they were going to receive this. Interesting, none of the patriarchs actually receive it. It's later on in history that the people of God receive the land and move into the promised land. But the point is, Jacob wants to go home. He knows that Egypt is not his home. He wants to go to the promised land. So what's an application for us today? Something we've talked about before.
Well, we want to go home and be with Jesus.
Yeah, this world, right? We sing the hymn. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. And when it talks about this world, it's talking about this system of things, right? Be in the world, but not of the world, those kinds of concepts. But, the reality is a lot of times we get persuaded, we lose track, we get lulled into believing um, and thinking and living as if this world really is our home, that the way things are functioning, the governments, all that. How many people, let's ask this question, right? How many people put their hope and their trust and their desires and their whole being into politicians and the political system? How many people do that? Is it a few or is it a lot? What do you think?
Entirely too many.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
Yes, I was in my insurance broker's office. He said someone came in and said after the election who they wanted to be president. He said when that happens, this coronavirus is going to go away. I mean that's pretty putting your hopes in a pretty bad place.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. There's a lot of people that put their hopes in politicians and the political system, right? If we just get the right people in, then this world will be wonderful. Isn't that right? I mean, isn't that the political rhetoric? Isn't that the political speeches? If you just get the right person into government office, all your worries will go away. I mean, am I wrong, or is that what people are selling?
Well, that's the rhetoric that you get.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
both sides are saying it. Both sides are saying it.
Oh, everybody says it, right? Everybody says it. Everybody's promising a land of plenty. They're all promising, you know, everything's going to be great. They're promising blue skies and rainbows, you know, get me into office, whoever it is. And then everything's going to be great. Now, here's the question. How many Christians get wrapped up into that? How many Christians get wrapped up into thinking this world is my home? That's not to say that we don't, you know, try to do the best we can, and we have certain rights and privileges here that we ought to vote and whatever with our mind on God. But let's be honest, a lot of Christians end up going the opposite. They go the wrong route, don't they? They end up putting their hope and their faith and their trust in the political system. Same thing happens with money. People put their hope and their faith and their trust in money. They put it in their children. They put it in all these different places. But that is this world system, and it's broken, right? So when we sing that song, "This World Is Not My Home," that's what we're talking about, or that's what we should be talking about. So Jacob, he knows that Egypt isn't his home. He wants to be buried. He wants to go home, right? He's going to go home to the promised land, to where his family is, his relatives, all of that. The application for us today would be that we need to make sure that we are putting our faith and our hope and our trust in glory to come, in Jesus, right? And looking forward to what is to come. We have to remember that this world is not our home. We have to remember that this system of things, because if we don't remember that, we will get wrapped up into everything that this world is putting at us. We're going to get angry if the wrong person gets in office. We're going to get upset. We're going to get depressed. We're going to have this happen. When viruses, pandemics come, we're going to be depressed. We're going to be upset. We're going to be all of these kinds of things. Now, I understand we live in this world, and so grief and all of that is a reality. The point is, we end up grieving like the world. We end up being depressed like the world. We don't have that bigger vision of really who we are and where we are headed. We get wrapped up into this world. I remember and I've mentioned this before, you know, I remember someone saying I think it's a song or something like that. But anyways, people say, "Come, Lord Jesus, just not today." You know, and that mentality is a mentality of what Jesus has for us in glory to come is not as good as what we have here. That's really what we're saying when we have that mentality. So anyways, something for us to think about. Jacob knew where home was, and it wasn't in Egypt. And this world is like an Egypt for us. We're passing through. We're headed to the promised land. All right. Anything else from this these last few verses here where Jacob wants to be buried, and then of course he breathes his last? All right. If there's nothing more, we'll move on. Chapter 50. All right. Let's look at chapter 50, and let's read verses 1 through 14. Anybody want to read, or shall I?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay, go for it.
Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants and physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out of for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now therefore let me please go up and bury my father, then I will return. And Pharaoh answered, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. And with him went all of the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all of the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all of the, wait a minute.
Sorry, I moved it up so you could see.
I lost my place. As well as all of the household of Egypt, my brothers, his brothers, and his father's household, only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was very great company. And when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning. They made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning of the threshing floor on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore, the place was named Ablamazram, I guess it's close enough. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of, what is that? Methuselah? Well, whatever. To the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with field from Ephron, the Hittite, to possess as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone with him to bury his father.
All right, very good, very good. Thank you. Okay, so what do we see here?
It amazes me that the Egyptians were mourning for Joseph's father as much as Joseph was, or at least they give that impression.
Absolutely.
And that they traveled with him.
Yes, that's right. They traveled with him, right? There's a lot going on. So there's mourning over Jacob's death. Now the children of Jacob go, but as you mentioned, you know, the Egyptians go and they bury Jacob in the promised land as well. What does that tell us about Joseph as well as Jacob in the eyes of the Egyptians?
They had great respect.
Yeah. Yeah, especially for Joseph. We don't know exactly, you know, what Jacob was doing during this period of time, but we definitely know that Joseph has gotten their attention and has gotten their respect. Somebody wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I did not realize that in those days that it was customary for 40 days for him to be embalmed.
Yeah, it's a
And
long time, huh?
70
It's a big
days
process.
to be weeping. That surprised me. 40 days for embalming.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It was a long process. They took their time. They took their time. Like a lot of other things. I mean, you know, weddings in the first century in Israel was like a week long. You know, they took their time at things. We rush around a lot of times, but yeah, the ancient world, it was a big deal when somebody passed on, especially somebody of importance or of respect and things of that nature. So they definitely took their time. What else is going on? Go ahead.
Embalming was a lot different from what they do nowadays because the bodies that are embalmed now don't last for centuries like the ones that the Egyptians embalmed.
Well, they turned that kind of turned the hide into leather, didn't they? I mean, it had the same shape, but it was more like solid leather or something.
Yeah, well, they drained all the fluids. They took out the brains and the hearts and the organs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was a big process, and they filled it. I think it was sawdust or something like that. There's a whole big practice and process that goes on with all of it. But they definitely dried out the bodies.
Did they do that with Jacob?
Yeah, they do it with Jacob. Yes, yeah, they embalmed him. Yeah.
We're not to that yet. Don't get in a hurry.
Yeah, right there with Jacob. He didn't say Joseph.
But doing all that, I mean.
Yeah, see, Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. Yeah. Yeah, so they definitely did all the embalming. All right. What else? What else do you pick up? What else do you see going on in here? Anything else? You should.
Do you think?
Go ahead. What?
Do you think Pharaoh may have sent some of the Egyptians with him to make sure he came back?
I don't get the feeling that that's what's going on. Is there something that you see in there that would kind of make you think that?
No, I
Okay.
just wondering.
Well,
Yeah.
and they left their children
Yes.
and
Yeah.
their animals, and I mean they left their stuff there.
Right, they did. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I don't get the feeling that that Pharaoh, made them go to make sure that they would come back. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say that Pharaoh told them to leave their stuff. It just says that they did it.
That they did, right.
Right.
So, I mean, they had every intention of coming back anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Now
That Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all of the servants of the Pharaoh and the elders of his household and all of the elders of the land of Egypt,
yeah.
as well as the household of Joseph. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of other officials in one also.
That kind of implies to me that it's they're doing it out of respect.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's any armed guards or military leaders or I mean it's definitely seems like a parade of noblemen, right? People of importance. It's kind of like, a president dies or a dignitary dies or, the Pope dies or whatever, you've got this parade of important people who come out to show their respect. We have that kind of same thing today. So yeah, I think that's probably more what's going on. There was this respect going on. Now, is there anything in this section here that we read that kind of sounds like something in the future. Are there any hints? Are there any echoes of future events?
Well, I kind of get the impression that they have no intention of staying in Egypt forever.
Well,
That
that's true, yes.
they have heard from the very beginning Canaan is going to be home,
Yes,
even though it's a long ways off.
absolutely, absolutely. And if you read this, there's sections of this that should echo and foreshadow the Exodus. It's not identical. There are differences, but there's things in here that should call to your mind the Exodus. You remember that in Exodus, Moses asks Pharaoh to let his people leave Egypt and go worship God. Now, Joseph does the same thing, right? He wants a very similar thing, I should say. He goes to Pharaoh and says, I want to go bury my father. Now, here, Pharaoh allows him to go. In Exodus, Pharaoh is stubborn and will not do it until God makes him do it. But there's some similarities here. In Exodus, Pharaoh is persuaded to let the people go. But he wants the rest of the family and everything to stay. Does everybody remember that in Exodus? Where the Pharaoh says, okay, you can go, just take the men, but leave the women, the children, and your flocks and everything. Does that, you guys remember that?
Yeah. At this stage of the game, though, everybody's getting along good together.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Whenever it comes time for the second Exodus, they're not getting along together.
No,
And are we talking about the same Pharaoh?
No, this is a different Pharaoh. No, the Exodus Pharaoh is a different Pharaoh than this one. But you should be able to pick up some of the hints. The people of Israel are going to come out of Egypt again. This time they're going to come out, and very similar things are going to happen. You know, here, some of the Egyptians leave with the people, right? They go up and they mourn with Jacob, over Jacob with Joseph and all that. They go up into the land of Canaan. Now, again, everybody's coming back down. It's not time for the nation of Israel to move into the promised land, but this is foreshadowing and echoing what's going to happen. When Israel finally leaves in the book of Exodus, a large number of Egyptians as well as other people go up out of Egypt with the nation of Israel. It says a mixed multitude go up out of the land. So there's absolutely some differences, but there's a lot of similarities. The concept of the people of God, all the people of God, they're leaving, they're exiting out of Egypt. Now, again, here, you've got the children that stay behind and all that. The difference there is in Exodus, everybody goes up and out. But there's some foreshadowing. Very similar to what happened when Abraham, remember Abraham goes down into Egypt. And then he comes up out of Egypt a richer man than when he went down. That's foreshadowing what was going to happen as well to the nation of Israel, because the nation of Israel, it says, plundered the Egyptians. They asked all their neighbors for stuff, and they gave them stuff, and they kind of plundered the goods and left Egypt richer than when they were in Egypt. Of course, they were slaves in Egypt. But there's some similarities. There's some forward pointing kind of markers and things. So definitely go back, reread the text, and see if you can pick up some of those kind of echoes that are in there. They leave the land of Egypt, they go up out. Again, there's going to be some differences, but there's some similarities pointing us forward to what's going to happen in Exodus. And that shouldn't surprise us, because again, we saw it with Abraham, we saw it in some other areas, but we're also getting to the end of the book of Genesis, and we're getting prepared for Exodus. We're getting prepared to go into Exodus here. All right, let me read the last few verses here, 15 to 21. So Genesis 50, 15 through 21 says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, They said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for the evil that we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Okay, so what is the problem, or what is the concern in these verses? What's the concern?
Well, Joseph's brothers thinks that he's going to turn on them as soon as their daddy's gone.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Now, do they have any reason to think that might happen?
Well, they did it once.
Well, I don't think they probably really had a reason to think that, but guilt eats at you sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And so, I mean, in their own minds, they probably did have reason to think that.
Sure. And, the reality is that in the ancient world, these kinds of things did happen. You remember that Esau was pretty public with it, but you remember Esau said that he was going to wait until his father died and then he was going to kill his brother Jacob. You remember that? Now, Esau was very public about it, right? He didn't have a problem. But that was something that people would do in the ancient world. They had enough respect for their father that they wouldn't do it. Some of them, I should say, some of them, because remember Joseph's brothers didn't have that much respect for their father. They were willing to give him. But some people, this is something that would have been, I don't know if it would have been commonplace, but it would have been something that happened on occasion where family members would wait till the father died and then they would, they'd kill the other brother or whoever, something like that. So it's not unreasonable in the culture that they're living in, but it's unreasonable in the sense that Joseph has never said anything bad to them. Once he revealed himself to them, right? Once he figured out who they were, their character or whatever, but he's always been good to them. Now, again, the brothers, I think you're right, Kimberly. I think the guilt is eating away at them, but I also think that their safety net is gone, right? That their father is kind of gone and Joseph is still in a powerful position. It's very likely he could definitely have them killed if he wanted to. And it was something that happened in the ancient world. Now, how do they come to Joseph? What do they say to him?
Well, they said,
go ahead.
They said, Dad said for you to take care of us.
Did Dad say that?
Yeah, no, we don't have a record.
We don't know.
Yeah, we have no record of it. So is it more or less likely that they are just making up a reason to try to come before?
And they didn't actually go to him, did they? Didn't they go to like his servants or something?
Well, they sent a message, right? They sent a message to him. So yeah, right here in verse 16, they sent a message to Joseph, right?
Because they were scared.
They don't go themselves. They don't go themselves. They send a message. You're right. So they think the reality is they think that they're going to die, right? I mean, you wouldn't send a message. You wouldn't send somebody with a message to say, "Hey, please forgive us," and all that, if you weren't thinking we might need to run away pretty fast. So they do send a messenger to him. So there's fear there. Now they do come together, right? So what happens is we read this, right? Verse 17, Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sins, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came. Notice that they come afterwards, right? They come and fall down before him. We don't know where they were. We don't know how far away they were, but they definitely, and this happens in Genesis, right? Sometimes the time frame and events kind of get crammed together. So if you read this really quickly, you might think that they were just there at the same time. But when you start to read it slowly and you see that they sent a message to Joseph, it's more likely that this is just kind of a condensed version of what happened. They probably were not too close by. They probably sent messengers back and forth, probably got a good report, something like that, and then they come. But they definitely, Joseph weeps about it, and then his brothers, when they come, they fall down before him, and they say, we're your servants. And then obviously Joseph says, you know, don't fear, don't worry about it. You know, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. But they didn't show up initially. They sent a message to him.
You don't think that they were standing outside the window to see how he reacted to it, to see if he threw anything before they walked in?
I don't think so. I think they waited to see if the messenger came back or the head of the messenger came back. That's probably what they waited for. You got to remember, we get this phrase, don't shoot the messenger, because that's exactly what they did in the ancient world. They would if you sent a request to somebody in power, Joseph's in power, you sent something to them, a message, the messenger, not always, but the answer no, you might get back the head of that messenger. That meant no, you know, that meant there's something bad, right? So they probably waited to get some kind of message back. If they really are fearful, they're probably not too close. And some of this would make sense anyways, because you remember, they're in Goshen, and Joseph is probably not in Goshen, right? He is taking care of the affairs of Egypt. So he's probably wherever the royal palace would be, wherever businesses, you know, it's not in Goshen. Goshen was like the farmlands and all that. That's pasture lands. He's in the city somewhere, wherever that happens to be. But they could have went and visited him, more than likely, but they don't. They send messengers to him. And again, they're afraid that he's going to take out vengeance upon them. And of course, Joseph says, I'm not going to kill you. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. God was doing something in the midst of all this. I'm not in the place of God. So Joseph is showing himself to be what in relation to his brothers and how they were? What kind of man is Joseph showing himself to be?
Compassionate.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a compassionate man. He's shown himself to be a... Go ahead.
I read that verse 19 wrong the first time that I read it. There where it says, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? I read it, do not fear, for I am in the place of God.
That's all right, we'll
And
forgive it.
the reason I was thinking of that was in chapter 45. He tells his brothers, don't be afraid, God sent me. And so I'm there because God sent me to be here. And so I was thinking, okay, that fits. I am in the place of God. But that's not what it says. It says, for am I in the place of God?
Right, yeah. No, you got it wrong. That's okay. That's all right. We often read...
As long as I don't screw up your mind, that'll be okay.
It's fine, yeah. Yeah, we can read what the Bible says there. Okay, we'll correct you with what the Bible says if we if we have an issue. I didn't actually pick up on it, so I didn't pick up your mistake there. So you were good. You called yourself out.
You were the one who read that, and you read it right. I'm talking about I read it before class tonight, and I read it wrong.
Oh, I see what you're saying. All right.
And when you read that, I thought, no, that's not right.
You got correct. Yeah. All right.
disregard.
So the probably one of the big lessons there would be that God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, right? Is that scripture?
I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, I read that somewhere in the Bible, right? That's somewhere.
Yeah.
And we see these kind of things played out. And here's just one more of those examples where, and here's where it's difficult, right? It's easy for us to read the life of Joseph and not get invested in the emotions, not get invested in the difficulty and the suffering and all of that. Just kind of read through it and be like, oh, yeah, no problem. Joseph went through it like a trooper. You know, he's like an Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator. Nothing hurts him. Nothing bothers him. Well, that's not the reality. He had a hard life. He struggled. He was abused in different ways, and yet he was God's chosen, right? He was the chosen one. And so we too can go through a lot of suffering and trials. And our attitude, as difficult as it is, and nobody is saying this is easy, as difficult it is, we ought to have that mindset of God is working all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. We don't know how it's all going to work out. Joseph didn't know how it's all going to work out. But in the end, it all worked out. And he comes to the conclusion that God was doing this. He was doing something marvelous to save not just me, but he was doing it that I might save, right? He might save through me all of you as well as all of Egypt and whoever else came down, right? Joseph being put in this position as a manager is rescuing or saving a lot of people from different countries, right? Some of these different nations who would have come down to Egypt to find food during this famine. So the blessing's not just for him or the people of God, it's for a lot of other people as well. There's that overflow we talked about, the overflow of being in relationship to the people of God. All right, last section here, last few verses. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. That's pretty good, huh? The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. Did we see that before? Where a father took the children of their child as their own?
I sure have, but I can't recall it right off.
Yeah, remember Jacob said to Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim are going to be counted as mine?
Right.
Yeah, so here we have Joseph doing a very similar thing as his father, right? He's following in the footsteps of his father. Manasseh's children are counted as Joseph's own. 24, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. All right, so when Joseph is ready to die, what does he make the people promise?
Take me home.
Right. Now, he doesn't get buried. He doesn't ask to be buried right away in the land of promise like Jacob had. But there's something else going on here, right? There's something more. What is Joseph saying?
Well, it's almost like he's predicting when it says God's going to bring you up out of here.
Yeah.
It's almost like predicting that that's not going to be, that they're not going to have that choice just to come and go.
Yeah.
At some point in time.
That's right. God's going to bring you up out of this land, right? He's going to bring you to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Absolutely. So there's a prediction here. There's some kind of he knows right? This isn't well, you know, hey, if God happens to call you guys to come out of Egypt, right? He might not, but if he does, you know, take me with you. I want to go with you. I don't want to be left in Egypt, kind of thing. No, he's saying when this happens. In fact, he says, God will visit you and bring you up out of the land. Now, when he talks to the his brothers, is it likely or unlikely that he's talking to his literal brothers, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah?
Possibly,
Yeah,
but
I-
I don't think that that's who he's asking to take him with him.
yeah, and then down here in 25, the sons of Israel, he's making the sons of Israel swear. This is unlikely, right? Joseph dies at 110 years old, and he was second to the youngest, wasn't he?
Yes.
Some people certainly are living, you know, still, you know, 125, 135 maybe, but the lifespan is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so it's probably unlikely that Joseph is actually speaking to his brothers. There might be, you know, one or two or something that are still left, but Reuben may very well is probably, you know, gone by now. But this whole thing, even if they're alive, he's definitely not speaking to them because they're not going to be alive when God brings them out of the land. So he's talking to his brothers according to the flesh, which is a very common thing. We read that all the time. Even in the New Testament, Jews would speak of themselves as brothers. They're brothers according to the flesh, those kinds of things. The sons of Israel would have been any of the children who were born to the children of the children of the children of Israel, that kind of thing. So he is not likely speaking to his literal brothers. He's speaking to the descendants. He's speaking to the people of Israel as they start to multiply. It could have been some of his literal brothers still around, still living, but it's bigger than that. It's deeper than that. He wants the people of Israel to remember. Now they should have remembered this, but they don't. They do take him up out of Egypt, but they don't remember this kind of promise. We'll see that they seem to have forgotten some things when you get into to Exodus. Okay, so we have the death. Go ahead.
Have you done much thinking about where you think Joseph was in the 400 years that they were in Egypt?
My guess is he would have been buried. He would have been put in somewhere with.
No. I don't mean that. I mean time-wise.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, they were in Egypt for 400 years.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to imagine where in that 400 years that this all took place.
Well, Joseph is in Egypt ruling for 80 years. So,
okay.
And that's total. So that's before Jacob even comes there. So he dies at 110. He rules for about, he's ruling and reigning in there for 80 years. So exactly where it would have been at the very best, it would have been at the first, you know, within the first 100 years, because he only rules in there for 80. So not long at all. And I don't know exactly when the 400 years starts. I know there's some chronology. I'd looked at that before, but typically you look at that when you go into Exodus to try to figure out when they come out and all that. I don't remember the exact details, but he's 80 years in Egypt.
Yeah.
So. All right. Anything else on that section there? So we've got the death of Joseph. We have the end of the book of Genesis. You can praise God now. It's been 2 years and 2 months. 2 years and 2 months. God bless you. You guys should have a master's degree in the mail on the book of Genesis.
James?
Yeah.
I just have one comment.
Sure.
It said Joseph lived 110 years.
Yeah.
And he saw Ephraim's children of the third generation.
Yeah.
I'm nowhere near 110 years. And I've seen children of mine of 3 generations.
Or more. I mean, we see more.
Or more.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. That's good stuff, right?
And I wonder if I make it to 110, how many generations I'm going to see.
Right.
Yeah, not everybody gets that privilege. That is a privilege. There's some people that some people don't even get to see their grandchildren. So there's definitely a blessing in that. Yeah, yeah. All right, if there's nothing else on this, all right, I'm going to take the rest of this time to talk about a special study. So we're going to take a moment here. I promise you, tonight is the last night in Genesis. We're not gonna jump into Genesis next week, but there's a special study on the typology of the life of Joseph. Does anybody know what the word typology means? What do we mean when we talk about typology?
No.
Okay, we got to know. Anybody know?
I don't.
Has anybody heard of types and shadows? That phraseology.
From the book of Hebrews.
Okay. Book of Hebrews talks about types and shadows. Sometimes we talk about type, antitype. The topic of typology, or types, antitypes, shadows, and substances, they're all really saying very similar things. Typology has to do with, we see someone who represents, or there's an event or something that foreshadows or points us to something else. Typically in the Bible, it's Jesus. So the life of Joseph is a type, is a shadow of the life of Christ. Isaac is a great example of this as well. When you look at Isaac being offered by Abraham on that mountain, that whole event that happens is a shadow. It's a type of what was going to happen to Jesus. Jesus is the unique beloved son of the Father. Isaac is the unique beloved son of Abraham. The Father offers up his son, right? You have the Father, you have God the Father offering up his son, you have Abraham offering up his son. Isaac is willing to be bound. He was a young man at that time. He definitely could have fought his father. He doesn't struggle. He submits to his father. We have the same thing with Jesus. He could have called 10,000 angels, right? Could have called legions of angels and all of that. He doesn't. He willingly goes. So there we see this type, this foreshadowing of Jesus. We see the same thing with Joseph. Now, if you're taking notes, this would be helpful. There's no way you're going to remember all these scriptures and all these references. If not, we are recording, so you can go back and watch this later. But Joseph is a picture of Jesus and his life. There's a lot to this, more than what I'm going to bring out tonight. But in Genesis 37, verses 2-3, as well as verse 18, we see that Joseph is a shepherd. He's a shepherd. And then, of course, in John chapter 10 and verse 11, this starts out with Jesus is the good shepherd. Joseph is his father's beloved son, right? We saw that again in Genesis 37. Well, Jesus is the beloved son of the Father. In Matthew 3:17, the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased." Of course, we have John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Both Jesus as well as Joseph were hated by their brothers, and they plotted to kill them, right? The brothers plot to kill Joseph. And then, of course, they hated Jesus and they plotted to kill him as well, right? In John 1:11, he came to his own people did not receive him. They rejected him. Um, his brothers said to him, leave here, right? Even his brothers, according to the flag, his half brothers didn't believe in him. And then, of course, there's other passages, but John 11:53, the Jews plot, right? Brothers according to the flesh, they plot and plan to murder Jesus. Same thing happens with Joseph. Joseph is stripped of his clothes. We saw that a number of times. But in Genesis 37:23, the brothers strip him of his robe. And then, of course, Jesus is stripped, right? Matthew 27:31, and they mocked him and they stripped him of his robe. He was sold. Joseph is sold into slavery, isn't he? He's sold by his brothers for some silver. Genesis 37:28, and then of course Jesus is sold. They paid 30 pieces of silver for him, but he's delivered by Judas. You remember that? In Genesis 41:38, Joseph has the Spirit of God upon him, right? Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find one like this in whom the Spirit of God, right? The Spirit of God rests on him. And then there's a number of passages. There's a number of passages where we see the Spirit of God descending upon Jesus, lighting on him. In Genesis, Joseph goes down to death. He goes down into Egypt. Egypt is the place of death. You remember that his whole family, his father, his brothers, they all believed that Joseph had died. He went down into the pit. He went down into death. And the same is true with Jesus. He dies and he's buried. He goes into the pit. So Luke 23:50. He rose up. Joseph rose up out from the pit. Verse 14 of Genesis 41. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. There's some symbolism going on there as well. He was certainly in prison, but he's coming up out. And Jesus comes up out of the grave. First day of the week, he rises. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, Christ has been raised from the dead. Joseph is placed at the right hand of power. Remember, Joseph is second in command, only to the throne. Pharaoh is greater, right? And Jesus is seated at the right hand of power, right hand of God. Everyone bows the knee to Joseph. You remember that? Genesis 41:43 says, and he made him ride, this Pharaoh made him ride in his second chariot. They called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land. And then we know every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth and all of that, that every knee is going to bow and confess Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. He was clothed with royal garments. You remember that Joseph has got fine linens put on him. He's got a gold chain around his neck and all of that kind of thing. So he's put this fine clothing. Revelation chapter 1 verse 13 says that Jesus, this is a vision of Jesus, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. This would be royal as well as priestly kind of garments, but you see this robing with royalty and things of that nature. And then, of course, Joseph saves his family from physical death, and then Jesus is salvation. There's salvation in no one else, no other name given among men by which we must be saved. And then, of course, Revelation, Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, firstborn of the dead, the ruler of the kings of the earth, right? He's the one who brings about salvation. There's more that you could look at. We could have done an in-depth study for weeks on the typology of the life of Joseph being a type and a shadow of Jesus. We've really just kind of scratched the surface with that. What I would encourage you to do is to go back, if you have time, go back, reread the story of Joseph and see how much is in there that really points you forward to what Jesus is going to come to do. Anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts on any of that? Does everybody see how how that works? The typology of Joseph's life, the whole life.
Don't throw this stuff away. You just got a good outline for a sermon there.
All right, so let me sum it up. In Genesis, we see from one man and one woman, sin enters the world and death with sin, right? We see the human family increase, but we find that the story of Genesis narrows down to Noah and then to his son Shem. And then it narrows down even further to Abraham, a specific man. God is going to use him to recreate humanity. Once we get to Abraham, the story is narrowed to discuss Abraham and his offspring, but then it begins to widen out again, and it includes not just one offspring, right? Eventually it gets to Jacob, but then it expands out to his 12 sons, who become the nation of Israel. We see that in the Exodus. So what you see in Genesis is, if I could drew a picture, you would see, we start out really narrow. We start out with two human beings, Adam and Eve, and then from there it explodes out, right? So you get a big picture. You got all of humanity. Then it narrows down again because you got the man Noah and his family only. So we narrow down to them. And it narrows all the way down to Abraham, Isaac. But then at Jacob, we see that expands out again. It expands out to his 12 sons. And then in Exodus, it's going to expand out to the whole nation, right? You have hundreds of thousands of people. It expands out. But then it narrows down. The whole story is very interesting. It got the narrowing and then this broadening. It narrows down to Jesus. We go all the way down and we find this one man. And then from Jesus, it does what? What's it do? We've narrowed down. Now what are we going to do when we get to Jesus?
It expands to all the Christians.
That's right. It expands out to the world, right? Anyone who would have life in him and all of that. So we've got this narrowing and then this broadening and widening. It narrows down to Jesus. And then, of course, it widens out because it's taking in the scope of all those who would come to faith in Jesus. So we see the beginnings of this anyways in Genesis, this narrowing and widening of the scope of what's in view. There's 6 things about Genesis that are contained in 2 sections. If you wanted to have just a real brief outline of Genesis, you have the first section, or the first category, you could say, is the creation of humanity. And within that, you've got 3 things. You've got the creation, the perfect earth, and the human family begins. Then you have the fall, which is the corruption and the decline of the human family. And then you have the flood and the purification of the earth. Then you have section 2, and that has 3 things in that as well, 3 points within that. So section 2 is a family. And the first section in that, the first point in that would be Abraham, the promise of the new family. And then you have Jacob, the development of the new family. And then you have Joseph, the preservation of the new family. And that might be a sermon too for you, Luther, if you want. You got a couple sermon outlines. Mike, I don't know, you have to preach, I can send you that as well. All right. Questions, thoughts, comments, anything?